I think we should break up, Marcus said, his voice hollow and distant, the voice of someone who had already made his decision long before this moment. I was standing in our kitchen, the one we had painted together just 3 months ago, the color called New Beginning. Ironic, isn't it? How life mocks you with such terrible timing. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. My coffee cup slipped from my trembling fingers and shattered against the tile floor, sending dark liquid pooling across the white surface like blood from a wound. Marcus turned away from me, unable to meet my eyes. That was when I knew. This wasn't about us. This was about her. My mother, he started, and I felt my heart splinter. She just doesn't think you're right for me. She's been saying that since we met, and I've been trying to ignore it, but he finally looked at me, and his eyes were red-rimmed with tears that hadn't yet fallen. She's my mother. I have to respect her opinion. I stared at him in disbelief. Marcus was 32 years old. He had a successful marketing career, his own apartment, his own life, or so I thought. In that moment, I realized I had been dating a child masquerading as an adult, a man who was utterly incapable of thinking for himself when it came to the woman who had raised him. Are you serious right now? I found my voice, sharp and cutting. You're ending our relationship because your mother doesn't like me? We've been together for 2 years, Marcus. 2 years of building a life together, and you're throwing it away because she said you were manipulative, he interrupted, his voice rising defensively. She said you were trying to separate us, trying to turn me against her. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that surprised us both. I've never said a single negative word about your mother. In fact, I've bent over backwards to make her like me. I've listened to her endless stories about your childhood. I've pretended to enjoy her dreadful casseroles. I've sat through her judgment and her coldness for 2 solid years. I know, Marcus whispered, and that was somehow worse than anger. I know you have. But she's convinced that something's wrong. She said she knows you from somewhere. That there's something about you that bothers her, something from her past that she can't remember. She said it's like you're hiding something. That was when I froze. The world seemed to tilt slightly on its axis, and for a moment, I couldn't remember how to breathe properly. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought it might never come undone. What did she say? My voice came out strangled. Exactly what did she say about knowing me? Marcus shrugged, that casual gesture that infuriated me even now. Just that something about you seemed familiar. Unsettling. She said she couldn't put her finger on it, but it was driving her crazy. She's been obsessed with trying to figure out where she knows you from. I felt the blood drain from my face. No, it wasn't possible. Not after all these years. Not when I had worked so hard to bury that chapter of my life, to become someone new, someone different from the girl I had been before. Marcus, listen to me, I said, stepping closer to him. We need to talk about this. We need to sit down and discuss what's really happening here, because breaking up over a feeling his mother has, that's not fair to either of us. But he was already backing away, moving toward the bedroom, or rather, toward his packed suitcase that I only just now realized was sitting by the door. The suitcase I hadn't noticed when he came home. The suitcase that meant he had been planning this, orchestrating this, staging this scene from the beginning. I'm going to stay with my mother for a while, he said, and the irony was so thick I could taste it. I need to clear my head. I need to think about what I really want. What you really want. I repeated numbly. Or what she wants you to want. He didn't answer. He just picked up that suitcase, and he walked out the door. And I stood there, alone in our kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, terrified of what was coming next. Because now I understood. Marcus's mother hadn't just ended our relationship. She was beginning to remember who I was. And that terrified me more than anything I had ever feared in my entire life. I spent the entire night staring at my phone, watching the seconds tick by on the clock, 2:17 a.m., 3:44 a.m., 4:56 a.m. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Patricia's face, that sharp, scrutinizing gaze she always fixed on me at family dinners. The way she would study me like I was a puzzle she was determined to solve. The way her eyes narrowed when I laughed, when I spoke, when I existed anywhere near her son. Patricia Ashford. The name itself sent shivers down my spine. My phone buzzed at 5:47 a.m., jolting me upright in bed. A text from an unknown number. Call me. We need to talk. This is serious. No name. No identification. But I knew. Somehow, I knew exactly who it was. My hands shook as I stared at that message. Every instinct screamed at me to delete it, to block the number, to bury my phone in the backyard and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. Some masochistic part of me needed to know if I was right. Needed to know if the nightmare I thought I'd escaped 10 years ago was actually clawing its way back into my present. I waited until 6:15 a.m., then called the number back. The phone rang only twice before she answered. Hello. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it, that distinctive rasp, slightly smoky from years of smoking, though I knew she'd quit a decade ago. The accent was there too, that particular blend of refined southern accent mixed with something harder, something calculating. Hi, I said quietly. Who is this? Don't play games with me, the voice snapped. I don't appreciate games. I know something about you. Something that's been bothering me since the moment Marcus introduced us 2 years ago. It's taken me this long, but I think I'm finally starting to remember. My stomach dropped. What do you want? I want to meet you. Face to face. Today. Without Marcus knowing. Absolutely not, I said, but my voice wavered, betraying my fear. Oh, I think you will, Patricia said, and there was something dark, something almost predatory in her tone. Because if you don't meet me, I'm going to sit down with Marcus and show him some things. Some very interesting things. And then I'm going to tell him exactly who you are. Or rather, who you were. What you did. The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of my bed so hard my knuckles turned white. You don't know anything, I whispered, but we both knew I was lying. Don't I? Patricia's laugh was cold and mirthless. Sweetheart, I'm starting to remember more and more. There was a girl. A girl from my past. A girl who made a very serious mistake. A girl who hurt someone very badly. And I think that girl might be you. Even if that were true, I said, my voice gaining strength despite the terror coursing through my veins, it was 10 years ago. I was a different person. I've changed. People don't change, Patricia interrupted. They just become better at hiding who they really are. That's something I learned a long time ago. In fact, I learned it from someone just like you. The implication hung between us like a blade suspended in midair. She knew. Not everything, maybe, but enough. Enough to be dangerous. When? I asked, my voice barely audible. Riverside Cafe. Today at 2 p.m. Come alone. Tell no one. And if I don't? Then Marcus gets the truth. And judging by how attached he is to his mother, how easily he just threw you out of his life based on her vague concerns. Well, I don't think you'll like what happens next. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dead silence. My entire body was shaking. 10 years. 10 years of building a new life, of changing my name from Catherine to Catherine James, of reinventing myself so completely that no one from my past would ever recognize me. 10 years of believing I'd finally escaped that girl, that version of myself who had been capable of such terrible things. And it was all unraveling. I pulled up my laptop with trembling fingers and searched for Patricia Ashford. The search results showed a wealthy woman in her early 60s, philanthropist, divorced, living in the prestigious Grandview Estates. Multiple photos of her at charity galas, her arm linked with important-looking people. She looked almost exactly as I remembered her, just older, colder, more dangerous. My phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Oh, and Catherine? Or should I call you Sarah? Let's not do anything foolish. I have a very good memory. And I'm very motivated to make sure that past of yours catches up with you. There was an attachment. I clicked on it with a sense of impending doom. It was a photograph. A newspaper clipping from 10 years ago. And there, in grainy black and white, was my face. The face I thought I'd left behind forever. My blood turned to ice. I had 2 hours to figure out what to do. 2 hours until I had to face the woman whose life I had helped destroy. The Riverside Cafe hadn't changed much in 10 years. The same faded awning hung over the entrance, the same mismatched chairs were scattered across the outdoor patio, and the same potted ferns drooped in the corners as if they'd been there since the beginning of time. I had chosen not to eat here for the past decade, had taken elaborate detours to avoid driving past this place, because every brick and board held memories I desperately wanted to forget. I arrived at 1:58 p.m., my hands clammy against the steering wheel. I had spent the entire morning in a state of frantic indecision. Should I run? Should I call the police? Should I get ahead of this and tell Marcus everything myself? But in the end, I knew none of those options would work. Patricia had me cornered, and we both knew it. She was already seated at a table in the back corner of the patio, partially obscured by one of those drooping ferns. Patricia Ashford looked exactly like I remembered her, severe dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp cheekbones, eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. But she was older now, with deeper lines around her mouth and age spots on her hands. She wore expensive jewelry that caught the afternoon sunlight, a diamond bracelet that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She watched me approach without smiling, without any warm greeting. Just watched, like a predator observing its wounded prey. "Sarah," she said, not as a question but as a confirmation. "It's been a long time." I sat down across from her, not bothering to correct the name. There was no point. "What do you want, Patricia?" "Such hostility," she said, picking up her coffee cup with a perfectly manicured hand. "You'd think I was the one who destroyed your life." I felt my jaw clench. "We don't have to do this. We don't have to." "Relive the past?" Patricia's smile was cruel, triumphant. "Oh, but we do. Because you see, Sarah, I've spent the last 2 years wondering why you seemed so familiar. And then last week, I was going through some old boxes in my attic. Photo albums from when my daughter was alive. And suddenly, everything came flooding back." The world tilted. "Meredith," Patricia continued, her voice dropping to something almost reverent. "My beautiful daughter. Do you remember her, Sarah? Do you remember what you did to her?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up, my chest constricted, and suddenly I couldn't get enough oxygen. Meredith. God, even hearing her name after all these years felt like a knife to the heart. "I know everything," Patricia said, leaning forward. "I know that you were her best friend. I know that you were in her room the night she took those pills. I know that you left her there, unconscious, and never called for help. I know that you let her parents find her too late. I know that you disappeared the day before the police wanted to question you." "I didn't," I started, but my voice cracked completely. "I didn't know she would actually." "Didn't know? Or didn't care?" Patricia's voice was sharp as broken glass. "My daughter was 22 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. And you took that from her. The official cause was accidental overdose, but we both know the truth. It wasn't an accident. She did it because of what you did. Because of the betrayal. Because you made her feel so worthless and so alone that she couldn't see any way out." I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. What was the point? She had me. She always had me. The moment she recognized me, my fate was sealed. I was young, I whispered. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. "You were a coward," Patricia spat. "And you've spent the last 10 years being a coward, hiding behind a new name and a new life, dating my son, infiltrating my family. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think you could just erase what you did and move on like it meant nothing?" "I've changed," I said desperately. "I'm not that person anymore. I've spent 10 years trying to be better, trying to." "You're exactly that person," Patricia interrupted coldly. "Because if you weren't, you would have come forward. You would have turned yourself in. You would have faced what you did instead of running away and pretending it never happened." She pulled out her phone and slid it across the table toward me. On the screen was a photo, a young woman with Patricia's same sharp cheekbones and dark hair, smiling at the camera with an innocence that made my stomach twist. "Meredith. Here's what's going to happen," Patricia said, her voice steady and deliberate. "You're going to break off all contact with Marcus. Today. You're going to tell him that you realize the relationship wasn't working and you need to move on. You're not going to tell him about your past. You're not going to tell him about me or about Meredith or about any of this." "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then I'm going to the police with everything I know. And I'm going to tell Marcus exactly who his girlfriend really is. I'm going to destroy your life the same way you destroyed mine." She stood up, tucking her phone back into her purse. "You have 24 hours, Patricia said. After that, I'm going to assume you didn't comply. And the consequences will be severe." She walked away, leaving me alone at the table with the ghost of Meredith Ashford sitting beside me like an accusing spirit. I finally understood the true meaning of being trapped. And I realized, in that moment of crystalline horror, that Patricia wasn't just going to destroy my present life. She was going to resurrect my past and make sure everyone I loved paid for what I'd done. Marcus agreed to meet me at the apartment at 7 p.m. He sounded confused on the phone, guarded, as if he wasn't sure what to expect from me anymore. I couldn't blame him. I had called him less than 48 hours after he'd walked out, and I was asking him to come home. From his perspective, I probably seemed unstable, desperate, pathetic. I didn't know yet that pathetic was going to be the least of the adjectives he'd used to describe me. I spent the hours before his arrival preparing myself. I sat on the couch, our couch, the one we'd bought together from a vintage furniture store in downtown, and I practiced the lie over and over again. The words had to be perfect. They had to be believable. They had to convince him that I was choosing to leave, that this was my decision, that I didn't want him anymore. Because if he suspected the truth, if he called his mother to verify, if he pushed back even once, everything would unravel. Patricia would make good on her threat. When Marcus arrived, he looked tentative, like he was walking into enemy territory. His dark hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Part of me wanted to feel sympathy for him, wanted to reach out and smooth his hair back the way I used to do, wanted to comfort him. But I couldn't. He had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. "Hey," he said, lingering in the doorway as if he didn't have the right to enter his own apartment anymore. "You wanted to talk?" "Sit down," I said quietly. He sat on the edge of the couch, leaving as much space between us as physically possible. The distance felt symbolic somehow, the chasm that had opened up between us not over the past 2 days, but over the entire 2 years we'd been together. I had been a lie. He had been an escape. Neither of us had been honest about who we were. "I've been thinking a lot since you left," I began, my voice steady and controlled. "About us. About our relationship. And I realized something." Marcus looked at me hopefully, and that's when I knew my first mistake was going to be making him hurt. But I had no choice. This was mercy in a way. A quick death rather than a prolonged torture. "I don't love you," I said. The words landed like stones in still water. Marcus blinked, processing. "What?" I said, "I don't love you. I care about you. I do. But I'm not in love with you, and I haven't been for a long time. I think I was just comfortable. I was using you because I was lonely, and you made me feel less alone." "That's not true," Marcus said, standing up abruptly. "We have something real. We've built something together." "Have we?" I interrupted, my voice cold in a way I had to force. "Or have we just been playing house? Going through the motions?" "Marcus, your mother was right. About some things, anyway. I've been manipulating you. I've been keeping you from her, keeping you to myself, because I needed you to validate my existence." "Stop," Marcus said, running his hand through his hair. "Stop talking. You're just saying this because you're upset that my mom—" "This has nothing to do with your mother," I lied. "This has everything to do with me finally being honest with myself. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. I haven't for months. It was cruel. It was designed to wound him in exactly the way that would make him give up on fighting for us. And I could see it working. I could see the moment hope died in his eyes, replaced by confusion and then hurt. "There's someone else, isn't there?" he asked quietly. For a moment, I almost told him the truth. Almost told him that the only other presence in my life was the ghost of a dead girl and the specter of a woman bent on revenge. Almost told him that I was a murderer, or close enough to one, and that his mother had recognized me as the person responsible for destroying her family. "Yes," I said instead. "I'm sorry. I should have told you before. I should have been honest with you from the start." The lie was a mercy, actually. It gave him someone to blame besides himself. It gave him a reason that made sense in the normal world, rather than in the dark, twisted reality I inhabited. Marcus stood there for a long moment, staring at me like he was trying to see through me, like he was searching for the woman he thought he'd loved. And then his shoulders sagged, and he nodded slowly. "I need to leave," he said. "I can't. I can't be here right now." "I know," I whispered. "I'm going to go stay with my mother for a while," he continued, moving toward the bedroom to gather his things. "Maybe permanently. I don't know. I need to think." "Marcus, wait," I called out, not sure what I was going to say, just knowing that I needed to say something, anything, to keep him from walking out the door and into his mother's arms and into whatever trap she was laying for him next. But he was already gone, stuffing clothes into his suitcase with jerky, angry movements. He wouldn't look at me. He wouldn't speak to me. He just finished packing, grabbed his keys, and left. The apartment fell silent. I had successfully severed my ties to Marcus, eliminated any connection that could hurt him through me. I thought I had one, or at least survived. It wasn't until 3 hours later, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, that I realized my mistake. The text contained a single line, "Good girl. But the game isn't over yet. Not by a long shot." And then an image attachment loaded. It was a photograph of me from 10 years ago, in Meredith's bedroom, holding an empty pill bottle in my trembling hands. My blood turned to ice. The apartment fell silent. I had successfully severed my ties to Marcus, eliminated any connection that could hurt him through me. I thought I had one, or at least survived. It wasn't until 3 hours later, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, that I realized my mistake. The text contained a single line, "Good girl. But the game isn't over yet. Not by a long shot." And then an image attachment loaded. It was a photograph of me from 10 years ago, in Meredith's bedroom, holding an empty pill bottle in my trembling hands. My blood turned to ice. Because that photograph should not exist. And the only person who could have taken it was someone who had been there that night. Someone who had watched. Someone who had let Meredith die. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything but stare at that photograph on my phone, trying to understand what it meant. My hands held the pill bottle. My face was a mask of horror and confusion. My eyes were wide with panic. But there was something else in that image, something I had blocked out or refused to acknowledge in all the years since that night. A shadow in the mirror behind me. Someone else had been in that room. I spent the entire night compiling everything I could remember from that night 10 years ago. The memories were fragmented, distorted by trauma and time and the desperate need to forget. Meredith had been upset. We had fought about something. What was it? A boy? Money? I couldn't remember anymore. The details had become fuzzy, replaced by a kind of emotional white noise. And then she had locked herself in her bedroom. I had heard the crying, heard the frantic movements, heard the sound of her rummaging through her bathroom cabinet. I had pressed my ear against the door, calling out to her, begging her to let me in. I had rattled the doorknob, but it was locked. I remembered being frustrated. I remembered being angry that she wouldn't talk to me. I remembered deciding to go downstairs to get her mother. But Patricia hadn't been downstairs. And when I finally managed to break down the bedroom door, Meredith was already unconscious, her lips blue, an empty prescription bottle on her nightstand. I had panicked. I had called 911, but not until after I had stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen with shock and horror. And then the paramedics arrived, but it was too late. Meredith died in the ambulance. The police questioned me, but I was traumatized, barely coherent. And then Patricia did something I had never fully understood at the time. She had defended me. She had told the police that I was just a scared girl, that I had called for help, that it wasn't my fault. She had protected me. Or had she? What if that protection had been something else entirely? What if she had been covering her tracks? My phone rang at 3 a.m., causing me to jump nearly out of my skin. Unknown number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Hello. My voice was hoarse from disuse. Did you like the photograph? Patricia's voice was calm, almost cheerful. I've been saving that one for a long time. Just waiting for the right moment to use it. You were there, I said, not a question. You were in that room. Was I? Patricia's laugh was like breaking glass. How interesting that you remember that. Because I've been wondering if you would after all these years. I've been wondering if your conscience would ever catch up with the truth. What did you do? I whispered. What did you do to Meredith? What did I do? Patricia repeated, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. Oh, Sarah. I think the question you should be asking is what did you do? What did you do that made my daughter so desperate to escape her own life? I don't know, I said. I don't remember. It was so long ago and I was young? Scared? Confused? Patricia's voice dripped with contempt. Those are the excuses people like you always use. People who hurt others and then try to pretend it wasn't their fault. But here's what I remember, Sarah. I remember my daughter coming to me that afternoon, crying, telling me what you had done to her. What you had revealed about her. What you had made her feel. I felt the words like a physical blow. There was something there, some memory struggling to surface, but I had buried it so deep that I couldn't quite grasp it. I was in the hallway, Patricia continued, her voice dropping to something almost confessional. When I heard the commotion, I came upstairs. I saw the door locked. I heard her crying. And I waited, Sarah. I waited to see if you would come back. If you would help her. If you would do the right thing. No, I breathed. No, you couldn't have. And when you didn't, Patricia went on, as if I hadn't spoken, when I realized you had just walked away, left her alone in there with those pills, I made a decision. I decided that if my daughter was going to suffer, then everyone responsible for that suffering was going to pay. I decided that I would document it. I decided that I would keep that photograph as a reminder. As proof. Of what? I demanded. Proof of what? You're insane. You let her die. You could have broken down that door. You could have called for help. I could have, Patricia agreed calmly. But I didn't. Because I wanted to see what you would do, Sarah. I wanted to see if you would come back. If you would try to save her. And when you didn't, when I realized that you had simply gone downstairs like nothing had happened, I realized something important. What? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. I realized that you were the same kind of person I was. A person capable of letting someone die if it meant saving yourself. A person willing to abandon someone you claimed to love if the situation became difficult. A person who could live with that guilt for 10 years and still call themselves a good person. The words hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. Because she was right. She was absolutely right. I had convinced myself over the years that I was a good person who had made one mistake. But I wasn't. I was someone who had abandoned a dying girl. Someone who had run. Someone who had let a decade pass without ever truly facing what I had done. So this is what? I said, my voice shaking with rage and despair. What? You're punishing me. You're making me suffer like you've suffered. Oh no, Patricia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. No, Sarah. I'm not making you suffer. I'm giving you a choice. And I'm very curious to see what you'll do when you realize that choice is between destroying yourself or destroying someone you love. What do you mean? I asked, but I already knew. Somehow, I already knew. Marcus called me an hour ago, Patricia said. He's devastated about your breakup. He's questioning everything about your relationship. He's vulnerable, Sarah. He's malleable. And I'm thinking about telling him everything. Not just about Meredith. But about the woman you really are. The woman who lets people die. The woman who abandoned my daughter. Don't, I begged. Please don't do that. He has nothing to do with this. And that, Patricia said softly, is where you're wrong. He has everything to do with this. Because by dating him, by infiltrating my family, by pretending to be someone you're not, you made him part of your lie. And now he's going to pay for it. She hung up. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, surrounded by the physical remnants of a life I had built on a foundation of lies, and I finally understood the true nature of Patricia's revenge. She hung up. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, surrounded by the physical remnants of a life I had built on a foundation of lies, and I finally understood the true nature of Patricia's revenge. She wasn't going to destroy me. She was going to make me destroy myself. I made the decision to go to the police at 6 a.m. on the morning after Patricia's call. It was the only logical option, the only choice that could possibly stop her. I would turn myself in. I would confess to my role in Meredith's death, or at least, to my negligence, my failure to act quickly enough. I would accept whatever consequences came my way. And in doing so, I would take away Patricia's power. Without secrets, she had no leverage. Without leverage, she couldn't hurt Marcus. It was a beautiful, simple plan. It fell apart the moment I opened my front door. Marcus was standing in the hallway, his eyes red and swollen from crying, his expression a mixture of confusion and heartbreak. Behind him stood Patricia, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She was smiling. That cold, calculating smile that I was beginning to realize had been her default expression for the past 10 years. "Marcus," I said, my heart sinking. "What are you doing here?" "My mother told me something," Marcus said quietly. "She told me that you lied to me. That you've been lying to me since the day we met." I looked at Patricia, and she shrugged as if to say, "I got tired of waiting." "Marcus, you don't understand," I started, but he held up a hand. "She told me about a girl," he continued. "About Meredith. About how you were there when she died and you didn't call for help. She showed me the police report. She showed me articles from back then. She told me you changed your name and disappeared and that you've been running ever since." "It's not that simple," I said desperately. "It was complicated, and I was scared, and—" "She also told me," Marcus interrupted, his voice breaking, "that the only reason you dated me was because my mother was the mother of the girl who died. That you were trying to get close to her for some reason. That you were using me." I looked at Patricia, and she was no longer bothering to hide her satisfaction. "That's not true," I said, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Because the terrible thing was, she had been there when we met. I had gravitated toward Marcus partly because he was kind, yes, but also because there was something about him that seemed familiar. And now I realized that familiarity had been his mother's presence in his mannerisms, his expressions, the way he tilted his head when he was listening. Some part of me had recognized her from the beginning. "I don't know what to believe anymore," Marcus said, and the devastation in his voice was almost worse than anger would have been. "My mother is saying that you might have even had something to do with Meredith's death. That maybe it wasn't an accident. That maybe you two fought and—" "No," I said firmly. "No, Marcus. That's not what happened. Your mother is twisting things, is trying to." "Is she?" Patricia spoke for the first time, her voice silky smooth. "Or am I simply telling the truth that my son deserves to hear? Sarah, why don't you tell Marcus the truth? Why don't you tell him exactly what you did that made my daughter feel so desperate that she wanted to end her own life?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that I couldn't answer it. Because the truth was murkier than any of us wanted to admit. I had done something to Meredith, something that had hurt her deeply, but the details were still fuzzy. And Patricia was deliberately keeping it that way, letting Marcus's imagination fill in the blanks with increasingly dark possibilities. "I'm going to the police," I said, making the decision in that moment. "I'm going to tell them everything. And I'm going to tell them that you've been blackmailing me. That you took that photograph and kept it all these years. That you've been using it to manipulate me into—" "Into what?" Patricia interrupted. "Into dating my son? Sarah, I don't think I ever explicitly told you to do that. I think you chose to do that of your own volition. I think you saw an opportunity to get close to me, and you took it. Just like you always do. Just like you always have." "You're insane," I said, backing away from both of them. "You let your own daughter die. You could have saved her, and you didn't." "I loved my daughter," Patricia said, her voice taking on an edge that made my blood run cold. "I loved her more than life itself. And when I realized what you had done to her, what you had made her feel, I made a choice. I decided that I would let you live. I decided that I would let you suffer knowing what you had caused. I decided that punishment through destruction would be too merciful. So instead you decided to destroy my life slowly," I said. "To make me fall in love with your son only to rip it away. To make me believe I had escaped my past only to remind me that it had been chasing me all along." "Yes," Patricia said simply. "That's exactly what I decided. And do you know what the most beautiful part is, Sarah? Do you know what makes this the perfect revenge?" I didn't answer, but she continued anyway. "The most beautiful part is that Marcus will never know whether what I've told him is true or not. He'll spend the rest of his life wondering if the woman he loved was a murderer. He'll carry that doubt with him into every relationship, every interaction. And whenever he's happy, he'll remember you, and he'll remember what you did, and he'll convince himself that he doesn't deserve to be happy. That's your real legacy, Sarah. That's what you've given him. I looked at Marcus, hoping to see some spark of doubt in his expression, some indication that he didn't fully believe his mother. But all I saw was confusion and pain and the early stages of the kind of psychological damage that would take years to heal, if he ever healed at all. "I'm sorry," I whispered to him. "I'm sorry for everything. But your mother is lying about." "I don't want to hear it," Marcus said, turning away from me. And his mother guided him down the hallway, her hand still on his shoulder, her victory complete. I stood alone in my doorway, realizing that I had been so focused on the trap that I hadn't seen Patricia's true goal. It wasn't to punish me. It wasn't even to destroy me. It was to corrupt me. To turn me into a version of herself, someone capable of hurting the people around them, someone willing to lie and manipulate to survive. I stood alone in my doorway, realizing that I had been so focused on the trap that I hadn't seen Patricia's true goal. It wasn't to punish me. It wasn't even to destroy me. It was to corrupt me. To turn me into a version of herself, someone capable of hurting the people around them, someone willing to lie and manipulate to survive. And as I watched them disappear around the corner, I understood that she had succeeded. Because I was now going to do something terrible. Something that would make me exactly like her. I didn't go to the police. Instead, I did what any desperate, cornered animal does when faced with the choice between self-preservation and morality. I chose survival. I spent the next 72 hours documenting everything I could find about Patricia Ashford. Every business transaction. Every financial irregularity. Every piece of evidence that suggested she wasn't the grieving, vindictive mother she had claimed to be, but something far more sinister. I hired a private investigator, spending money I didn't have to look into Meredith's death more closely. And what he found made my blood run cold. There had been inconsistencies in the official investigation. Questions that were never asked. A toxicology report that didn't quite add up. The investigator brought me a theory, carefully worded and heavily caveated, but unmistakable in its implication. Meredith hadn't just overdosed on pills she had found in her own bathroom. Someone had given them to her. Someone who had access to her bedroom. Someone who had a motive. Someone like her mother. I stared at the report for hours, my hands shaking. Because if this was true, if Patricia hadn't just let her daughter die, but had actively caused her death, then everything changed. The revenge, the manipulation, the psychological torture she had inflicted on me for the past weeks, it all took on a new, horrifying dimension. Patricia hadn't been avenging her daughter's death. She had been covering up her own crime. And she had chosen me as her patsy, the perfect scapegoat for a murder she had committed herself. I made the call to Marcus at 2 a.m. on the 4th day. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Sarah?" He sounded confused, guarded. "What do you want?" "I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "And I need you not to interrupt me. Can you do that?" I don't think he started, but I cut him off. "Your mother killed Meredith," I said flatly. "Not me. Not accidentally. Your mother deliberately gave your sister a lethal dose of medication and then let her die. And she's been blaming me for it for 10 years. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "That's insane," Marcus finally said. "My mother would never." "Would never what?" I demanded. "Would never hurt her own daughter? Would never manipulate you? Would never keep you so emotionally dependent on her that you can't make your own decisions?" "Marcus, has it never occurred to you that maybe your mother is the one who's been lying? Because you have proof of this?" Marcus asked, his voice dripping with skepticism. "You have evidence?" I did, actually. I had a report from a private investigator. I had inconsistencies in the medical examiner's findings. I had motive and opportunity and a 10-year pattern of manipulation and control. What I didn't have was absolute certainty, because certainty isn't something the past ever provides. The past is always open to interpretation. "Come to my apartment," I said. "I'll show you everything." "Why would I do that?" Marcus asked. "Why would I believe you now, after everything you've lied about?" "Because," I said quietly, somewhere deep inside, "you already know that something is wrong with your mother. You've always known. You've just been too afraid to admit it." He didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, I heard the terrible truth. He did know. Some instinctual part of him had always recognized that Patricia's love was possessive, that her devotion was obsessive, that her control over him was absolute. He had just been more comfortable with that dysfunction than with the possibility of being alone. "I'll be there in an hour," he finally said. When Marcus arrived, I showed him everything. The private investigator's report, the inconsistencies in the autopsy, the pattern of behavior that suggested Patricia was far more emotionally disturbed than any of us had realized. And most damning of all, I showed him the photograph, the one she had taken that night, the one that proved she had been in the bedroom while her daughter was dying. "She was there," I said quietly. "Your mother was in that room. And she took a photograph instead of calling for help." Marcus stared at the image, his face draining of all color. "This doesn't prove she killed Meredith. It just proves she was there." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't prove it. But it suggests it. It raises questions that the police should have asked 10 years ago but didn't." Marcus looked at me with something between hate and desperation. "You're just trying to manipulate me again. You're trying to turn me against my mother to save yourself." "Yes," I said, and I meant it. I was manipulating him. I was lying to him. I was doing exactly what Patricia had accused me of doing. I am trying to save myself. But that doesn't make what I'm telling you untrue. And that was the terrible paradox at the heart of everything. I was guilty of the manipulation Patricia had accused me of. I was guilty of using Marcus. I was guilty of prioritizing my own survival over his well-being. But I was also telling him the truth. Both things could be true simultaneously. Lies and truth could exist in the same moment, and it was impossible to separate which was which. "What do you want me to do?" Marcus asked, and the desperation in his voice broke something in me. "I want you to go to the police," I said. "I want you to tell them about the photograph. I want you to tell them about your mother's behavior, about the way she's been controlling you, about the inconsistencies in Meredith's death." "And then what?" Marcus asked. "Then you disappear? Then you get off free?" "No," I said. "Then I turn myself in. I confess to my role in Meredith's death. I accept the consequences. But at least the truth will be known. At least your sister will have justice." Marcus sat down heavily on my couch, his entire body sagging under the weight of everything he was being forced to process. And I realized in that moment that Patricia's greatest cruelty wasn't what she had done to me or even what she had done to Meredith. It was what she had done to her son, raising him to be so emotionally dependent on her that the truth about her nature would destroy him completely. "I need to think," Marcus said finally. "I need time to process this." "You don't have time," I said gently. "Your mother is probably already planning her next move. Every moment we wait, she's consolidating her position, making sure you're so completely under her control that you'll defend her no matter what evidence surfaces." He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the moment he made his choice. Not because he believed me, not because he loved me, but because, deep down, he had always known that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong with his mother. And sometimes, the truth you've been avoiding your entire life finally demands to be acknowledged. "I'll call the police tomorrow," Marcus said quietly. "I'll show them the photograph. I'll tell them everything." I nodded, and I felt something shift inside me. I had gotten what I wanted. I had saved myself. And in doing so, I had destroyed Marcus, his mother, and what was left of my own soul. Because the truth I had failed to tell Marcus was the most important one of all, I wasn't innocent in any of this. I hadn't come to him with pure intentions. I had manipulated him into going to the police not because I cared about justice, but because I was desperate to avoid prison. I had become exactly what Patricia had always said I was. A monster who sacrificed everyone around her for her own survival. And as Marcus left my apartment, as he walked toward the confrontation with his mother that would destroy their relationship forever, I realized that Patricia had won after all. She had wanted to corrupt me, to turn me into a version of herself. And she had succeeded. The only difference was that while she had let her daughter die to cover up her crimes, I had actively encouraged a son to turn against his mother. We were both murderers now. We were both capable of anything. And somewhere in the darkness of Patricia's perfectly decorated house, she was probably sitting alone, smiling that terrible smile, knowing exactly what I had become. knowing that her revenge was complete. Knowing that I would spend the rest of my life wondering which of us was truly guilty of Meredith's death, the woman who may have administered the fatal dose, or the woman who had stood by and let it happen. The police investigation that followed took 3 months. In the end, they didn't have enough evidence to charge Patricia with murder. But they did have enough to open an investigation into the original case. They did have enough to question the medical examiner's findings. And most importantly, they had enough to tear apart the Ashford family completely. Marcus moved across the country to escape the scandal. I was never charged with anything, though the investigation did dredge up enough details about that night to make me understand, finally, what I had done to Meredith. The betrayal. The cruelty. The absolute destruction of a girl who had trusted me. And Patricia? She disappeared. Sold her house, liquidated her assets, and vanished into the kind of anonymity that money and careful planning can provide. The last text I ever received from her came 6 months after Marcus went to the police. You did well. Better than I expected. But remember this, we're the same, you and I. And people like us don't get happy endings. We get exactly what we deserve, a lifetime of knowing what we are. I never responded. I didn't need to. I already knew she was right. I had gotten everything I wanted, and in doing so, I had lost everything that mattered. Marcus hated me. My past had caught up with me. And the woman I had become was someone I barely recognized in the mirror. Patricia had destroyed me without laying a finger on me. She had simply shown me the truth. And that truth was far more devastating than any external destruction could ever be.